So we are in session 4 of 5. So we have one more after today. And next week, could we meet earlier or later next Thursday? I'm teaching a class online for ministers, that people sign up for, and it will be running from 10:30 to 12. From 11 to 12:30. So I could meet earlier and be done before 10, or meet later and be done in the afternoon. Meet like at 1 and be done at. The next one will just be an hour. It won't be an hour and a half. So we could meet from 9 to 10. 9 to 10, or from 1 to 2. Would either one of those work well for everybody?
Is 9 awfully early for you to get here, Kathy?
I'm well fun, but I haven't set an alarm to get up at 8 or 9. I can make it by 9.
Well, that's going to be pushing you to.
No, if I'm done here at 10, I can go get on Zoom in my office by 11. I live 5 minutes from here, so I can be at my house. But we can also we can skip a week, or we could do it at 1 o'clock. If that class gets canceled, I don't think it will, but if it were to get canceled, I'll let you know, and we'll just do it the regular time. But
9's awful.
I'm not a morning person.
So what about would 1 o'clock
night.
work for everybody?
1 to 2, that's fine.
Sure, 1 to 2. Thank you all. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you for the flexibility.
So next week's at 1.
Next week at 1. Yeah, I was getting that on the recording at the beginning of this recording. That way, if they don't watch the whole recording, they'll still know the plan. All right, so we're in session 4, which is funeral planning. And as I've said in other contexts, if you die without a will, North Carolina has one. If you're found laying somewhere, you will be dealt with. So there's...
You have to register your will.
No, you can register it. There are ways to register it, but one of the negatives of registering your will is that I will be among the voices that encourage you to keep it current. So do you want to pay $10 and register it every time? So I'm the legal will you have is the one that's the most current, done legally, and put in, established. And I encourage you to destroy all old wills thoroughly. Anybody who has the original or any copies, every time you replace it, just destroy all the old ones.
Don't put it in your safety deposit box.
The original. You could put a copy there, because people might, if they were challenged, or somebody lost the original or wanted to say, anyway, there might be use. I don't think you need one in your safety deposit box.
Well, sometimes safety deposit boxes don't get opened until too late.
They're not supposed to be. Yeah. Even if I'm a signature and I die, and my wife's also a signature, she literally can't open the box she's the signature on because I died. And she has a right to whatever part of my stuff in that box my will says. So they actually would keep my wife, if they were to know and follow the law, they would not let her have access to the safety deposit box until directed by the process of probate. So it's all that stuff that, the number of things I woke up realizing no one ever told me when I started researching all this to write the book and all. I just kept over and over again going, I didn't know that. And it wasn't that anybody said, we can't tell George we can't tell him to plan ahead and include his grandchildren before they're born in his plans. Don't tell him to do that. It wasn't that people weren't excluding me from wisdom. It's just it wasn't passed on because, like, my dad grew up in an extended family where everything was done without asking. In fact, you had to tell people, stop nosing into my business and trying to do everything, And so it was...
and we don't always know the questions to ask. I mean,
well said.
People are happy to answer them, but if you don't know what to ask, it's like...
Yep. No, that's right. And I think that's why, I mean, that's the truth. We collect a lot of wisdom about what you can't control, right? One of the central themes of wisdom is know what you're not in charge of. And the other side of wisdom is know what you are in charge of. And so the good life, if the good life is inside of everything you don't control, including the future, if your good life resides in the future, if your good life resides in some place in something you don't have, then the abundant life of John 10:10, Jesus promising us that he came to give us life and give it to us abundantly, is not true, because the abundant life is always in the future and it never happens. So we actually have to, that was part of my conversation with my friend who's disabled this morning, was why I was running a little later than I wanted to be, was just, to help him keep remembering he has the capacity to have the good life now, and even savor the fact that the resources sustaining him now and the relationships supporting him now, that he doesn't like being dependent on people, but for him to remember that he's receiving what he built. And so that you actually have a good life. You're receiving the love you've been part of building with other people. And so enjoy the good life. And I'm sorry for how individualistic our culture became, so that you actually resent the process God ordained, because the God ordained process is that we give and receive and give. We die and live, we live and die. And we want to give without receiving, and not even understand that as in receiving, it's a sacred part of our job is to receive with gratitude, and not resent needing it, and I just can't kiss, every farmer that raises yellow squash that I eat, but it's one of my favorites is squash and onions in the summer, and I just can't kiss everybody that raises squash and onions, but I can receive it and be grateful. And if I'm mindful about it, I'll know that there's animals dying to fertilize the field in years future, and rains accumulating in the storms that will water the squash. If you just take squash, in my book I use coffee as the example, but you have to give and receive. You have to give and receive. You don't have to be grateful and enjoy it, but I'm encouraging you to be grateful and enjoy the giving and receiving, but you have to. You don't even get to exit yourself from the trees that made the oxygen that you just inhaled. You don't have to say thank you and hug a tree. Now, I've heard people mocking tree huggers, and I'm like, do you not consider the lilies or the oak trees? If you do, you'd hug because that's God giving you breath. So don't fail to... Anyway, I'm turning into a preacher, so that's not what I'm here to do. Funeral planning is a gift to the people who are still living, and part of the legacy of the person who dies. Funeral planning is a gift to the people still living, and part of the legacy of the person who dies. There are people whose legacy gets shifted when you're sitting there in a memorial service and you learn all kinds of things about the person you didn't know from the people who knew them in ways you didn't. And you walk out of there going, wow, I didn't know. And so I think funeral planning is vital. but it's also a place that that steals from. That's probably it. That is a judgmental statement, isn't it? It uses up resources that the person who died may not want used up in the way they are used, if that makes sense. You can end up having a funeral that costs more than you would have chosen for it to cost, done in a way you wouldn't have chosen it to do, and the legacy of financial resources or the place you want family to gather to remember you and the way you want them to gather to remember you, or the person that you're helping plan, is not what you want. So there's money spent you would have spent differently. There's time and energy spent that you would have directed differently. And so it's a sacred thing. In fact, that's one of the shifts happening now. If you're a minister and you notice, is that the centerpiece of a funeral was, in my early ministry, always faith and religious and spiritual. And now I'm part of many funerals that might include spirituality or religion, but are very much a different experience than the funerals I did early on. And so anyway, everything shifted, and I want to empower people, give us all agency in our own life. I call it the dignity of choice. If it's your choice, I want to give you the dignity of an informed choice, and not an uninformed choice. So here we go with informed funeral planning. Basic questions of funeral planning: who will make the decisions? The answer is different if you're still alive. How will the person's story be told? How will their legacy be honored? Are there religious, cultural, or family traditions you wish to include? And I'm encouraging you to slow down and really think about each one. And I'm going to ask if you have any erupting thoughts when I get to the bottom of the list. How do you want a funeral memorial, or do you want a funeral memorial or other gathering? I was just found out literally just a month or so ago. My wife and Tammy and I are updating our plans, and we're moving to a different plan than the one we had. And we kind of decided we didn't want to have a big funeral or spend money or anything. So we were letting our sons know, that we're going to have a green burial that won't cost much, and we're just going to have some money available. If y'all want to have a get together, you can, but don't worry about anything that you don't want to do. And my younger son was like, no, we're going to have a funeral and everybody's going to get to say goodbye. And so I want you and Mom to tell me what scriptures would you want read? Each of you want read, and what songs do you want sung? We'll all pick some, but tell us what you want. And so we're putting the funeral plan together for the people who will be alive if we die first. And that's what I wanted, and we wanted, because we wanted to remove the burden of them performing something that we expected. But I didn't want to abdicate the responsibility of giving them what they need so they can grieve the way they choose to grieve. And so I'm in that weird position of doing more of a plan than I would have chosen. But that was all right. So who is the funeral memorial for? And that relates directly to what I was telling the story. The purpose of my story is we choose that it won't be me being remembered the way I choose to be remembered, but that we actually have a process that helps our kids, grandkids, friends. But there are people who sit down to plan their funeral with their people. It's not that they're not involving others, but they plan to tell their story very intentionally by the way they structure the whole funeral or memorial service, and intend to have the story told their way, at least in the formal. Your story gets told however it gets told, away from the microphone at the funeral. Everybody's talking and deciding who you are and who you've been. who do you want involved in the plans? That's part of what's been going on with us. And then are there special rites, honors, and invitations to dignitaries that need to be arranged for? The commander of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base spoke at my dad's memorial. That had to be planned. I arranged for the missing man formation to be flown over the grave by 3 pilots from the little airport in Lewisburg, because the missing man, 3 planes fly and then one just goes off. Anyway, you have to arrange those things, and you have to arrange military rights if you want military rights done. If you want a particular person to speak, it's kind to give them some options if they're the one you really want, instead of putting pressure on them to cancel their already made plans. And so, do you want to receive family, friends, community who wish to pay their respects? Our old plan was that whoever died first, we would put the coffin in the house, in the big room in the house, and everybody would just come by and be together for a day, and whenever you want to drop by, and the family would just be there and receive you all day long. A lot of people want the 2-hour, which sounds agonizing to me, where you stand in line and everybody comes through and you have this huge eruption. And my experience would be I'd have every emotion over and over and over and over and over. And all the people I wish wouldn't come would show up, and I'd have to be nice, and like all of that happening all at once. I'm just saying that's my perspective. I'm not being judgmental about anybody who wants to do that, and I have seen almost all the families I have been dealt with do that, and I think it's fine if you don't have the experience I have, but I have a different experience of everybody all at once in 2 hours shaking my hand and telling me, and I'm supposed to stay composed and grateful. I'm just saying. That's why I would not choose the receiving line thing for 2 hours, even though it's a way to condense it so you get it over with, and that's what most people do. And I want to say it again. I'm not dishonoring the best way to do it for yourself. Whatever the best way to do it is, the best way to do it.
I was shocked the first funeral I went to that everybody was lined up and you had to go down the line. In our family, it was just
Yeah. And that's another illustration of plan a funeral so that it's the one you want if it's yours, and it's the one the family wants if you want the family involved or friends involved. How soon do you want to do each step of the process? I've done a couple of funerals with rabbis because people have Jewish family roots, and they have requirements that they wanted honored, and those have time. Something you have to, and you don't embalm, things like that. So, what do you want? How soon do you do it? Well, it has something to do with what rites of passage you're part of or whatever. Some people want, a good friend of my son's who was one of my boys in the neighborhood growing up, he's now 42 years old, but when he was 12 years old, he hung out at my house as much as his own. But his mother died yesterday, and the memorial's on Monday. But anyway, so how long do you want to wait? Where will people gather during the planning? When you sit down to plan, where would you have where will people gather around the scheduled events? Will you have all of them at the church, some at the funeral home, some at home? Where would you do it? I've done a couple at the Elks Lodge and Moose Lodge, and in the woods, places anyway. Who should be notified in order to support the family? So I think that it would be nice if you knew that, so that the people who don't know, my dad is the youngest of 13, can just imagine the number of cousins. So which cousins would want to know immediately and make plans to be somewhere, and which cousins would just eventually want to know Hiram's gone, you know. But they wouldn't, because they haven't been close, because their mother had left home 15 years before Dad was born, you know. She was that much older than him, you know. So anyway, any thoughts or reflections? I love what you shared. And any other thoughts? Yeah, George?
I think any funeral is a celebration of life. And I get perturbed when I go and think I'm sitting in a sermon at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and there's nothing mentioned about the person that accepts salvation and all that, and that just gets in my craw the worst of anything, because this should be a celebration of that person, what they did, and not someone sitting there trying to get an altar call at a funeral. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I know many folks who share that understanding, and many folks who think since there's in their understanding of hell and heaven, there's so much at stake. You got everybody there, you better give them a chance. And you know, I have a different understanding, but I understand.
I mean, this
I'm right with you.
person, we wouldn't even known whose funeral we were at
Yeah.
if we didn't know ahead of time. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking at Tom, and he's looking at me.
No, that's exactly right. No, like I said, I want to keep coming back to make it for the people that it's for, make it what is best for them. And again, some people it's for the person that died mostly, and for some it's mostly for the people living. And then in some cases it's mostly for the people who may not have prayed to receive Jesus. That's who it's for. And that may be what the person who died ordered. I've had people say, now, Pastor, when you do my funeral, make sure you offer salvation to everybody there. You know, so if they ask me to do it, I don't just do that when I'm asked, but that's not what my default is not to do that. My default is I don't do that. Although I affirm the joys of having Christ in your life, I don't hone down to ask for commitments at the time, you know, or whatever. But anyway, any other thoughts?
You need to have a conversation with the preacher. I mean, because a lot of that can be taken care of.
Exactly. That's the idea. Plan ahead. Every sermon I've done at every funeral I've been part of, and I've been the singer, the main preacher, or the secondary preacher, the friend who's speaking not as a pastor but as a friend of the person who died. You know, I've been in all kinds of roles. I always want to know how to be part of what the person and family want. I don't have an agenda that I need to infuse on it. Yeah. Kathy?
Because I've gone through this fairly recently, I want to speak to timing.
Mm-hmm.
My husband had a year where he was declining rapidly,
Mm-hmm.
But still, when death comes, it's still a shock. And had we had the funeral within a week's time, it would have been a very traumatic, sad occasion for me. It would have been very hard.
Mm-hmm.
I lucked out. I have 2 twin granddaughters, and they were in many camps all summer. Their mama organizes them.
Uh-huh.
And so, number one, we wanted the whole family to be able to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So to work around their schedules, it was almost a month before we had the memorial service.
Right.
And by that time, all of us had worked through a lot of the grieving part,
Mm-hmm.
and it was truly a celebration of life. And
Yeah, that's right.
that time, looking back, I know was important to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been with families who want to get it over with so they can grieve, and I've been with plenty of families who want to grieve and then celebrate. And I'm not judging anybody's way of wanting it done. And I've seen families at odds with each other because of those two approaches. Where some people in the family are, we just need to get this over with so we can go on with life. I don't like having everybody talk to me all the time about the dying. And then I've seen people who are like, we're going to make this a celebration. And I've seen people at odds with each other about it. That's why it's important, I think, to be proactive so you can have that disagreement without the emotions of grief in it. If you're having them after someone dies, people could be really ramped up, and it's a lot more of an explosion than it would have been if you'd had it earlier. Yeah.
How about pre-planning? I mean, can you get these prepaid?
Pre-planning, that's the name of the game. You can prepay as well, but you can pre-plan without prepaying. But you can pre-plan and prepay. You know, and that's what you were asking. Yeah.
This is a stupid question. And it's just, well, why do people want to eat? Why, when they go to funeral? I mean, that's an extra burden on the family. Can you help me, Kathy?
Yeah, my husband, it was big to him. He wanted to host a meal. So we had the memorial service at 11. We went to the fellowship hall. I greeted. This was when we did the greeting, but I greeted. I made my kids be scattered so people could go to the kids that they knew best.
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to get the line through. I wanted to get them there to the food. We had 200 to 300 people having barbecue, and it was a wonderful celebration. Again, we had that period of time, and it was a marvelous celebration.
The historical answer, and we're in our place in history, so
Whether you're Baptist or Methodist.
is
that the key?
The historical answer is that when someone died in a well blended family, a family that actually cared about each other and extended each other, for people to leave the fields and where they're working and do all that and journey, on horses and by foot and everything, to be in a place that remembered and celebrated the life of someone who had died, and to offer and support and find out who takes care of this and who takes care of that, because the person's now not able to take care of it. The process was very much a community process. So one of the reasons that you had meals in the Jewish tradition, there's a long period of grieving that's sacred, that you start and it goes for a certain period of time. And during that time, it's the obligation of the synagogue family to maintain food available so that everyone who wants to come and be with the family that's grieving can come and be with the family that's grieving. But it's also true that one way you can be together as animals, human animals, without forcing an agenda on the conversation, is to eat. And so if you want to know why churches should eat together, it is that we have the very experience together of watching each other have what we know we all need and give to each other what we know we all need, and in a context where the conversation can be rising out of who I am and who you are and where I am. And so the reason that all of our traditions in the Judeo-Christian tradition involve meals, sacred meals. They are sacred meals. And every Lord's Day that the churches Paul wrote letters to, every church Paul wrote a letter to on the Lord's Day had a meal. Every week on the Lord's Day they had what they called an agape meal, a love feast. And they brought because many of the people in the church were too poor to bring a lot. And so the people who had more brought more, and the people who had less brought less. And they shared an agape feast every week. And in 1 Corinthians 11, you have a poignant passage from Paul where he says, you gather together and you sit separately and you don't talk. So you make the communion of the church ritualistic and not relational. So you come and you do, not to be judgmental of how I do it or how we do it, because I do it the same way we do it. But we've turned communion into an individual coming up and going back and sitting down, and we don't involve meal. And so you actually have the sense that you take communion individually, which is anathema to the New Testament. I mean, Paul is angry when he sees that. So in 1 Corinthians 11, he says you separate yourselves when you take the meal. And he says in 1 Corinthians 11, you do not discern the body of Christ. You're not seeing and experiencing the body of Christ that you are because you take communion and the meal separately. And they're in the same room, you see what I'm saying? So, and he says in that same letter, you also argue with each other and fight, which shows you just drink milk. You have not matured in Christ because you're arguing. And even the communion in chapter 11, he gets to it. And even in communion, you sit separately. Rich people over here, the people in this race over here and the people in that race and religion over there. And you separate. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm turning into a preacher, and it's way, as my wife would say, George, you did not answer the question. You told the whole thing that no one asked for. So I'm sorry if I made it too big, but
I'd say one reason is there's somebody in the church or a committee that when there's a funeral, my wife gets a call about providing the thing.
yeah.
She's the one.
And it is, I think the work experience is part of the fact that we don't experience it as a community. And so I'm doing it for someone I'm not related to, I don't feel deeply connected to. Therefore, it seems as though I'm just providing food for a meal. And that, I would say, that's a totally legitimate experience and emotion around it. And we have formalized, churches, I don't mean just our church, but we have formalized providing meals, and everybody pitches in. So I think it's a good thing, but I'm also, want to restate it. If you don't want a meal and you don't want everybody going through the trouble of creating a meal, then plan ahead not to have one, because somebody's going to have the instinct to bring food by. And so say, we don't want food brought by. And I've seen families actually give the gift of telling people that we're not going to all be gathered at one house, so don't start bringing food here, because this isn't where we're all going to be. We're going to be scattered about. And I'll see some families say, we only want for everyone who traveled from out of town. The most typical thing I've experienced is we want some meal after the service for those who traveled to be here. We don't want to add to the expense of their journey by them having to go out to eat away from home. And we'd like to talk to them since they came so far to be with us. We'd like time to talk. So we would like a meal, and it's not for everybody who came to the funeral. It's a meal just for the ones who traveled from out of town, or who are close family, and we just want to have, a couple of hours to sit and talk and hug and cry and tell stories. And we appreciate help doing that. And so,
Well, from my experience, I feel like sometimes I just want to be by myself. I don't want all these people coming up telling me the same question. But then I think I need those people too. So
Well
you're torn
said.
between the privacy you want and the way you want to be supported.
perfectly said, George. Perfectly said. I think that is, again, that gets me back to think and talk and plan ahead. Because I think you need to be honored with the time you need alone. And I think you need to be given the gift of the people who want to let you know that you're loved and cared for. And so I don't have a suggestion as to the best for you. That's why I'm doing this class, is I think I want to equip people for the dignity of choice, is the way I understand my role. So you are equipped to have the dignity to choose it for yourself and with whoever you want to build it. Is that you see my theme? And I'm going to tell you, I've told you, and I'll tell you some more stories about what we're doing, but I'm not making that anything to aim for. I will just share some more stories that just illustrate the complexities. And I would dare say, as many funerals as you've been to, and we're all old enough that we've been to plenty, I've done more. And so I'm going to give you the variety of experiences I have are huge. I did one where, almost everyone came on a motorcycle, and it was very different than any of you. But so it's like, anyway.
I'm sorry, I thought.
No, that's why this is an hour and a half and not an hour, because I could talk through this in 30 minutes. But I'm wanting it to be illustrated by our own experience and stories and questions. When you said it's a stupid question, I think it's just the opposite. It's a deeply important, rich question. How do you gather? And why and when would you want food involved? I think that's
See, I don't eat.
You don't cook. That's your fault.
Not anymore.
You don't want to cook.
Not anymore.
So you don't
No, I didn't marry a cook either, so I understand. What do you want when you die? What do we want when we die? What do we want for those grieving? And what now I'm doing is just helping you see the perspectives. What do you want to give to those who are grieving, either when someone else dies or when you die? How would you want to support the people who are grieving? And think about the work they're doing. That's what's in the outline now. What about the spiritual work they're doing when you die or when the person dies? How would you like to support the event in their own spirit of this person dying or of you dying? How would you want to support that? And then the next thing on the next page, the emotional and relational. I have seen many women outliving their husbands who did not know how to write a check and did not know how to log into accounts. And the relational need they had was somebody to come along and do or teach them how to do everything the person that died was doing. I've seen a few where there was this thing called a farm that had to continue to be run, and the widow did not run the farm, and the kids didn't live next door. You hear what I'm saying? But there was I was more a mediator of the process to find solutions, because there was the one I'm thinking of was a lot of conflict about what should be continued, what should be stopped, what should be sold, what should be kept. And there was no estate plan and no funeral plan. Preacher, we need your help was the call.
Wow.
So, I was more a professional mediator than I ended up being a minister, and they were grateful. But along the way, I was mostly a mediator of disputes.
See, my thinking would be, you got this big farm, what are you going to do with it? That should have been discussed years ago.
Years ago. Before
what-
the favorite daughter lived in Ohio and the less favorite daughter took care of everything.
Oh.
You hear what I'm saying? Okay. And But, anyway, the one that succeeded located away. The one that stayed high maintenance stayed at home, but actually drove them to every appointment, changed their diapers and everything. And you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, and then the practical transitions in our absence is related to the relational. The relational and the practical, relational. They don't happen separately, but they can be considered separately as you blend them back together. So think about those kind of things. And the cost during the grieving. So who writes the check to get the body moved? Who writes? I say write checks. There's almost no checks written anymore. Who arranges for the payment of moving the body, of processing, doing with the body what you choose to do with. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. During the grieving, there's the beginning of the estate being settled, probate being started. The relationships, how are things going to shift? Legacy, story and impacts after we die. Because, I come back again to stewardship in life, death, and legacy, is that now when we're thinking about death with estate planning and now funeral planning, the legacy is being shaped even as the person's life ends. The legacy moves on. The person may in 3 or 4 generations not be talked about, but their legacy is still moving in the family.
May I insert something you don't have here? Hospice care. The night my husband died, and it was the middle of the night, 2 a.m., my older son was there. He had sat up with his dad. And he did not awaken me until he was very sure his dad had died. And I guess our first call was to 911. I can't promise that's true, but that's what I think. Anyway, 2 nice young Morehead City policemen came. I think their purpose of being there was one thing, and when they found out that Yates had been under hospice care, that just kind of smooths everything out.
Right.
It was ready to proceed. And then I guess we called the people at the funeral home sometime. I'm not sure about the timing of all that, but and I'm not even sure who came to get Yates' body, whether it was I assume it was the funeral home then. They were willing to release the body to the funeral home at that point.
Yep. And your story illustrates 2 things that I want to keep us reminded of. One is there's a process that will happen even if you don't know it and can't remember it. And if you plan ahead, it will be more what you want. And one of the documents I'm giving you is the process of taking care of a body in North Carolina, as by North Carolina law. So you're going to get that. Who will direct the planning when we die? Who will direct the planning? Who will process the body? That's what we're just now getting to. Bodies can stay in the morgue for a time. You have to have the right medical authority to declare them deceased and fill out a cause of death. When the police showed up in that story, they were going to make sure that happened, and once they knew hospice was in charge, they knew it would happen. Because the kindest thing that everyone in authority wants in North Carolina is that the family have what they want and the support they need, and they're going to make sure that the body isn't left in the woods with no one to do anything. So it's they have to make sure a process happens, and they want what they want is what the family wants without violating the need for there to be a declaration of death and a cause of death. The appropriate authority will need to sign the forms that establish the time and cause of death. There's also a form that needs to be used to transport the body. The medical examiner will be involved based on the situation surrounding the death. And if you have hospice, they have a process that is very well facilitated. Who needs to be present before the body is moved? In other words, when the person dies, are there people that have let it be known they want to show up before the body's taken away? Who needs to be informed related to commitments of time, money, attention? The person is now deceased. You are now not controlling their assets by a power of attorney because they're dead. The power of attorney only exists while they're living. Now they're dead, and now everything's shifting to their will and the estate. And who needs to be informed that the person has died? So like for me, my dad helped establish the USO at RDU Airport. The whole community of USO at RDU Airport loved my dad because he was one of the ones that founded the thing. And so I let the appropriate person know there. They wanted to know so they could be part of what happened. My dad did Meals on Wheels, so he hadn't done Meals on Wheels for a while because he'd been sick. But the Meals on Wheels community wanted to know he had died. You see what I'm saying? His 355th Fighter Squad that met every year for a reunion, they wanted to know. I created a list so I could get that done quick. Made an email group, and when Dad died, I emailed them all so they could all get it at the same time. Who needs to know? Where are the plans located? Where are they? Who knows? You remember located in your head and located in print or digital. Where are they located? Have a collection of primary and secondary contacts for those who will be notifying people of the death. So let's just say my dad dies, and I'd rather not be the one that has to make sure all that happens. I don't want to be the one that has to tell all those people Dad died. So I could actually collect it all in a way in which I could say to a friend who might, if I think ahead, know they were going to do it before they were asked to do it. But I could say, here, would you do this for me? And just let everybody know.
A lot of times now people on Facebook will notify that it's a person that's passed, which all those tentacles goes to everybody that knew them.
That's right.
So that's an easier way. It's not though.
And that is part of a plan. Posted on Dad's Facebook page.
Do you have any comments about donating bodies for medical?
Yeah, we're coming to that.
Oh.
We're going to be there. We're going to get there in just a minute. We'll be able to talk about that more thoroughly. And then where are the plans located? And I play primary and secondary. Who needs to know right when it happens, and then who needs to know by the time the memorial's happening, or so that it's kind of two waves of information. Where is the plan? When there is a plan, you gather an appropriate people to read through the plans and assign tasks as needed. You meet with the funeral director if a funeral home is involved to finalize the details. You make adjustments based on current circumstances, available funds, people able to participate, and you decide how much the desires of core relationships could be considered. And the core relationships, I mean whoever is close enough to need to be involved. So Kathy illustrated, waited for the twin grandchildren to get there. That's what I'm talking about. So do you adjust it? Who do you adjust it for? And if one of my friends from Michigan says, I'd like to be there, but I can't be there till next July, they don't get to change the date, because just one of the friends from Michigan. But if my son says, I'm teaching in St. Paul, Minnesota from this date to this date, and I'll return to North Carolina, and I'd rather not pay for a round-trip ticket for a day. I'd rather it be where I could sit with my brother and my friends, and then, okay, we'll wait 10 more days to have it or whatever. When there is not a plan, you gather the appropriate people to make a plan. Complete the plans that legally intern the body or remains, honor the deceased, involve the appropriate people, pay the expenses. Who will pay for each expense? If you don't have a plan, guess when you get to do that? In the middle of whatever the death causes in the lives of people. Okay, so let's walk through the forms. If you go past the outline, we're going to walk through the forms. Let me get... Okay, so we're starting with cost for end-of-life options. You got no-cost options. You can will your body to a university. I will say that the baby boomer wave of baby boomers dying, there are universities that don't need any more. Especially need any more bodies of old people. You can help doctors practice their skills by donating yourself as a cadaver for medical education. You can give your body to a body broker. There actually are for-profit and non-profit folks who, use the body in useful ways, and they do that. So there's an upside and a downside to that. There are low-cost options as cremation. If you do cremation, the ashes can be dealt with. My dad, the majority of his ashes were buried next to my mom in the plot we have for our family at a church I used to pastor in their cemetery. But some of my dad's ashes were sprinkled on all of his siblings' graves in Arkansas. So I went to as he wanted. He had a role in his own dying and a role in his own planning. And so I took ashes and I sprinkled some on every one of his siblings' graves in Donaldson, Arkansas. You can have a memorial service in a church, funeral home, or other location. Ashes in an urn can be kept by a family member. I do know family who the place Dad sits is in a place everybody knows in the home place, and they kept. Last I knew, it was still there, but they might have decided eventually to bury it or do something else. You can have a graveside service and burial, even if you have ashes. There's medium cost options like graveside service and burial. They cost more because if you're going to bury someone who's been embalmed, North Carolina law requires they be in a vault so that the toxins of embalming and all don't end up in the groundwater. And so there are more and more people who are choosing not to put vaults, which actually contaminate at some level as they degrade. And so some people are choosing not to do embalming and all because of awareness of that. But the laws are there to protect the environment. And then there's green burial options that are really growing in popularity. These can avoid embalming, metal caskets, cement vaults, cremation, environmental toxins, and costs. So a lot of people aren't aware that you can be wrapped in a shroud or put in a softwood casket and buried wherever there's permission. It doesn't have to be in a cemetery. It can be on a home place or on a friend's place, and then you're just, like most of human history, part of what fertilizes the earth as it moves on. And you don't have to. You can bury on private land. There are green cemeteries. There's one just a couple miles from here. and you walk through the woods. They have a path through the things. You walk through the woods, and there's little places that honor folks. And some are piled up because the body hadn't decomposed, and others are sunk down because the body has, and you can reuse the space once the body's fully decomposed. As Mr. Good, who was my social studies teacher in 9th grade, he created a memory for me when he said, well, one of the things that you have to do is decide what to do with dead people, when he was telling us about civic duties and stuff. And I was like, I hadn't thought about it, and he said, eventually we're going to have some different plans than the plans we have now. Now remember, this is 1973 or 74. And I was like, what? He said, eventually if you lay everybody beside each other, you're using up land that needs to raise food. You see, I'm still thinking about it today. I was like, he's actually right. And so there are many municipalities that rotate cemeteries now, because you literally are using up the land future generations need. Spreading out the people who are side by side. And I was like, I've been thinking about it since '73. So. Green cemeteries is alkaline hydrolysis. I don't know if you know about that, but they can put you in an alkaline solution, and then you have a pristine skeleton left, which you can either cremate that or do whatever you want with it, including bury it and let it decompose. But and then you have human composting, so that you actually put people in a place where they intentionally decompose, and then families will use the compost that Dad created, and fertilize their garden, and they see it as a sacred cycle, and just remember that most of human history did not have the general population being treated as royalty. The only people who had graves that were marked and bodies that were preserved were people who were high on the power system and economic system. And now we've established a middle class whose bodies are treated as only royalty was, or sacred, leaders were for most of human history. So if you go to Donaldson, Arkansas, there's a place in the field of the land my granddad owned. And you have the option of landing there. As I said, I dropped Dad's ashes there. So high cost options are a funeral service and a burial in a cemetery, because then everything involved has a cost, and there's a range. And I remember early on, I don't remember if it was the first time, but I remember being with a family that was with the funeral director making decisions, and I was just along with them, really more there to plan the funeral service, but they wanted me there to walk through it with them. And we walked into the casket room, and they started at the prettiest, most expensive caskets, and then eventually, if you want to save money, you can have this one down here that's literally $15,000 less than the first one. But my experience emotionally, it was, well, mom's worth, and you make an emotional choice at the beginning of those options rather than a practical choice at the end. And so I had I know I wasn't super popular with the funeral people, but they would say, what do you think we ought to do? Because they wanted the oak casket that cost $17,000 or whatever. And I said, well, one option you have is that you would choose the simplest casket possible, and then spend a few more $100 on the spray that goes on top of the casket, and everybody will go home talking about the amazing, beautiful flowers on top, and that cost you a couple extra $100 rather than 10 extra thousand. And so I made people were grateful for that piece of advice. I gave a lot. And so you can spend more money on the flowers. But anyway, then there are these eccentric options like send your body on tour. I don't know if you've been to the body. Have you been to the human body tour? Yeah, I've been to it twice. Where they have bodies that are preserved, and you can see the circulatory system and the skeletal system, and all there. So.
You wonder where those people came from in those exhibits, but it must have been the broker you mentioned.
It may have been the broker, and
Is that where they can have slices? We have been.
yeah, you can become a skeleton. You can be on display at a museum. The cryogenic preservation is the most expensive, elaborate, eccentric, if you will, where you pay to have your body flash frozen and preserved until they find a way to make you immortal or cure the thing that was killing you. And there are people choosing that as well. My brother-in-law, who just died a month and a half ago, he donated his brain, not his whole body, because anyway, it doesn't matter. But and that was the first time I've been involved in someone who donated their brain. I've been involved in some that donated their body, but it was more donated to be dissected, so they weren't preserving the life of organs in order to be used. And so this brain donation was through a foundation and stuff that my sister-in-law and her nurse daughter arranged. And so when Robert died, they had to very quickly take his body, harvest the brain, and refrigerate it so it could be preserved in order to be investigated the way they wanted to investigate it. And Robert had lifelong epilepsy and traumatic brain injury in 2 car wrecks that were neither one their fault. And so they actually wanted to see, what's the effect of brain trauma and epilepsy on a brain. So he donated his brain. There's a lot of options, and you can see that almost all these options involve planning ahead, and that if you don't plan ahead, it's often inaccessible to do the less expensive. I'm not talking about cremation or where you get buried, but those are there. So, and then the next form is funeral pricing checklist, and I'll need to go through all that. But when you're using services for the funeral, whether it's being done by your family of choice, by your pastor or church family, or whether it's being done by professionals through the funeral home or whatever, it's good to slow down and think about every one of them. And then if you look on that second page, prepaying funeral costs, if you get a prepaid funeral package, be really clear on what you're paying for, what happens to the money you've prepaid. Is it put somewhere in collecting? Some of those policies are written for the people who buy them, but they're all written for the people who sell them. You hear what I'm saying? Some of the policies are written for the person buying them and have lots of benefits and savings for the person buying them, but every one of them makes a profit for the people that sell it. So you can, if you're on Medicaid, you can preserve. Last I knew it was $1,500. That's not part of your diminishment of your resources to qualify for funeral costs, but you have to actually have that dedicated. You can't just announce you have 15. You go to a funeral home and arrange it, and you don't have to include the $1,500 in the $2,000 that you can have for Medicaid. And remember, you also have the long-term care costs that we talked about last time. Or if you have a long-term care policy of $250,000 And then the funeral planning of $1,500, that's $251,500 you can have and still be on Medicaid. So you're, are you protected if the firm you've paid goes out of business? It's a good thing to, it depends on who you're doing it with. There are multiple companies that do it. So I suggest planning ahead, and that way you can make a wise choice on whether you pay ahead. Planning ahead and paying ahead are two decisions made separately and together.
Now, that pre-plan at the funeral home, are you suggesting that's out?
Am I suggesting what?
I thought that you go to the funeral home and have all this prepaid funeral cost.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like you may have some outside insurance people that would sell you something that would cover it. Am I misunderstanding that?
No, you would. The ones I'm thinking of, you can access through funeral homes, but I've just been involved enough to know that there are offers from funeral homes that are more and less about you saving money and more and less about them making money. So that's why I'm suggesting that you really know what you're paying for, because there are, for instance, the prepaid one that Tammy's uncle had, and I was his power of attorney, so I did his probate in Texas, even though I lived in North Carolina. But he had a prepaid package, and what I noticed was what he paid and what he got, he was well taken care of, because what he ended up, the guaranteed services of his policy cost significantly more than the amount of money he put in. But he had bought it years before, and it was a good policy. So it had basically accumulated value over time. But I also know people who buy a policy, they pay a certain amount, and the expenses go up, and they get that amount, but the company has been earning interest, if nothing else, earning interest on that money the whole time, and the policy value doesn't go up. So that's what I'm saying. You pay attention to what you're paying for and what it looks like in the future. And that's more important if you're buying it when you're 40 and in good health than if you're buying it, at 95 and you're going to die soon. Then you're prepaying with what it's going to cost is what you're going to give. You're just going to plan ahead, pay ahead. And then funeral plans is just a process of a bunch of things to think about. And remember, you don't have to do any of it, but except what's legally required. So like pre-writing your obituary. Now what I like is that now you have funeral homes and crematoriums and green burial options and everything and they maintain a website, and your obituary can be on the website. And now it's no longer legally required in North Carolina that you publish an obituary in a newspaper, because so few people read newspapers. Because in the past, you had to put it in the newspaper, and there was a real short announcement that was required, and that doesn't cost much money. But then you paid for every word you added to the obituary, and the newspapers, part of what paid their way was what you paid for an obituary. Now you can write a very elaborate obituary with pictures and everything, put it on the website, and there's no additional cost. So now you can pre-write an obituary. And remember, if you pre-write an obituary, you can edit it before you publish it. So you could have a section that's just all facts about the person, career and things like that you could have ready to go in a document on your computer, and you just copy and paste it when it's time. Like, do you want all that information? Work history, wishes for your remains. Do you want to be part of deciding that? Burial options are there, just kind of mapped out individually. And then So that the first page, and this is front and back. The others I've done weren't front and back, but I saved a little paper by doing this one front and back. The things, military service, obituary, all that. And then wishes for your remains, burial options. What people are wearing can either matter or not matter, based on whether you have open or closed casket, if there's a casket. Jewelry, some people intentionally want to not be buried with their jewelry to keep it in the family. Some people want to be buried with their jewelry. If it's their jewelry, guess who gets to decide? If you want it buried with you, then you have the right to make sure that happens. Glasses to be worn, those. I copied and pasted a list that I thought was thorough. I didn't create it from scratch, but I also added and subtracted a little bit along the way. And then your other requests on the back of that: burial information, site, all that. It was during COVID too, but we went on a trip to Scotland to see my son, who was teaching at the University of Edinburgh. And I had a friend of a friend, so a good friend of mine had a friend whose wife died, and she came down with advanced pancreatic cancer and died pretty quickly. And she and her husband had planned to go to Scotland, and they had, had it on the calendar and had bought everything, and they weren't able to do it. And so her husband asked my friend, when my friend happened to mention, hey, my friend George is going to Scotland. And he said, oh, would he mind taking some of her ashes? And so I had a little thing of her ashes, and I carried it to Scotland and went to the park in downtown Edinburgh and made a little video where I just honored her real briefly and poured the ashes out underneath a tree in a park in Edinburgh. So you see what other details. What site preferences do you want a marker? Again, you can save money by planning ahead on the marker you might want. And you might do something really beautiful and creative that costs $0 out of your pocket.
My boys used to tease me because I have all these little bunny rabbits buried around the yard. And they said, we're just going to find a big piece of Tupperware and put you out there with the bunny.
If that's what you want, that's what I'd do. Notice on the next page, do you want military rights? Just remember, if someone served in the military, so far they haven't decided not to fund it, and assign it, but there'll be a detail sent to do military rights for anyone who's a veteran. Sometimes you're sent the flag, and the funeral home themselves will do it, or someone at the service will do it. Dad had the however many gun salute done at his, but Dad had more rights guaranteed by the military because he was 30 years and all that stuff. So and then service information. On the back of that is this casket viewing, attendees, pallbearers, who will give a eulogy. I just was helping you have what I think is just a thorough process of what to think about. And then let's see here. In the form. In the forms that are printed, and I think, Kathy, you wanted a copy, right? So you see how many forms there are? There's no duplicates. So there you go. Who else wanted a printed copy? Wanted one? Okay. The body it could go in your notebook too. Yeah, you had one too, Bill. Yeah. I'm gonna send out to everyone on an email. I was able to put all the forms in one PDF. So it's just one file with every form in it, so you don't have to print them out separately. And within that one file, all you'd have to do to print a particular form would be to choose those pages and print those 2 pages out of the whole document. So I'll be sending that along to everybody as well. Did you guys want a copy?
We didn't sign up for one, so.
Well, I had her print a couple of extras, so.
Huh? Okay. I do have one question, so.
Yeah.
From what Kathy said.
Well, we can make copies.
So, in North Carolina, if you're under doctor's care or hospice care, then you don't have to have an autopsy, and if you're not under doctor's care, then you would have to have one, or is it not?
It's a choice made by the authorities involved
I see, so,
as to whether an autopsy is done or not.
okay, because I know in Colorado where my mother passed away, she wasn't under doctor care, and she had to have an autopsy.
That is a default in place. But for instance, like with people, I just won't pick on anybody in particular, but with some folks when they died, that they might have they've been under a doctor's care, but they weren't in hospice, and so when they died, and the cause of death is clear, they don't have to do an autopsy. If there's any question about the cause of death, then they will default to doing an autopsy. And I don't know how thorough and firm it is, but as I understand it, the next of kin have the right to request an autopsy, and the state will do one if you want one done. I've been involved in at least 3 deaths that the family requested an autopsy because they suspected, and you've seen the stories in the news in 2020 and 60 Minutes where someone was poisoned even though it looked like a natural death. And so you won't discover that. Like one of the famous ones was the wife that was put in a little bit of antifreeze, and it actually made the body toxic. And unless you do an autopsy, you don't know that's what caused the toxicity. It looks like something else happened. And so you have it's always good if you're feeling bad to know why. And so I'm gonna stop the recording here real quick. Everybody remember, if you're watching you get to the end of the recording, that we're meeting next week at 1:00 instead of 10:30.